Johnson family tragedy shook a quiet Blah County neighborhood. On September 2nd, 2003, a distressing 911 call came from Kim Richards. She explained that Sarah Johnson, 16, had rushed to her door, crying that her parents, Diane, 52, and Alan Scott Johnson, 46, had fallen victim to a violent event. Paramedics and deputies arrived quickly and entered the residence to assess the scene. Diane lay in bed with a bullet wound to her head, seemingly as she slept, while Alan lay nearby in a towel. What began as a seemingly straightforward double tragedy soon prompted questions as investigators reviewed the details. They heard water running and followed a damp trail to the bathroom, where the shower remained on, and a bullet hole was evident in the wall. On the bedroom floor lay the rifle believed involved, a .264 caliber Winston. 2 blades were found, one at the foot of the Johnsons' bed and another on Matt's bed. There were no signs of forced entry, and the house appeared undisturbed, with doors left unlocked. Sarah recalled waking to a sudden loud report, rushing to her parents' room, calling for her mother, and then hearing a second report before fleeing to a neighbor for help. A neighbor corroborated her account. The property included a guest house that had been rented to Alan's close friend, Mel Spiegel, 45, who was not present. Investigators recovered the scope matching the rifle on the bed, and Mel was missing, his absence raising questions for the case. The unexplained disappearance of Mel Spiegel added another layer to the ongoing inquiry. The investigation branded Mel Spiegel as a possible person of interest, and lead investigator Sergeant Walt Femling sealed the entire property. He directed officers to halt the waste truck from removing any trash cans on the property, a measure tied to the notion that Mel had clashed with Alan and Diane and in a moment of heat took their lives. As investigators pursued that theory, Wrench's team searched the trash and uncovered additional evidence. They found a pink bathrobe, tightly bundled, inside which lay a latex glove and a brown leather glove, matching one discovered in the Johnsons' bedroom, along with ammunition for a .25 caliber firearm. All the evidence was tied and dispatched for DNA testing. While investigators weighed their own scenario, it became clear the person behind the crime knew the doors were unlocked and the trash had been removed that day. It was time to bring in Mel Spiegel for questioning. Hours after the double homicide, sheriff's deputies learned that Mel Spiegel had been located in Boise, Idaho. Mel agreed to speak with investigators and met them at the Boise police station. He described spending the weekend with his family and planning to return to Belleview within a week. Investigators checked with his relatives, who confirmed his alibi. Asked about his connection to Alan and Diane, he said he had rented their guest house for years and spoke of a close relationship. When asked about the rifle used, Mel acknowledged it belonged to him, but said it had been locked away in his closet before he left for Boise. He also mentioned that Alan and Diane had begun worrying about their daughter, Sarah, who had started dating a 19-year-old named Bruno Santos, reportedly living in the country illegally and involved in illicit dealings. Authorities urged other family members to talk, and a fuller picture of the Johnsons' history began to emerge. Alan and Diane had met in the early 80s. Diane had a son named Matt from a prior relationship, and Alan adopted him when they wed in 1983. They moved into a beautiful home in the quiet city of Belleview, Idaho, and welcomed their daughter Sarah Marie Johnson on January 25, 1987. Alan was a co-owner of a landscaping firm in Bellevue, and Diane worked as a tax collector. The couple were well known in their community and described as a loving family. Alan Johnson loved trap shooting, a pastime shared by many in his community. By outsiders, the family in 2003 appeared harmonious. 22-year-old Matt studied at the University of Idaho in Moscow. Sarah excelled at school, played on the volleyball team, and was Alan's beloved daughter. Yet investigators soon uncovered tensions building for months. They pursued leads, even weighing a possible suspect, before returning to Bellevue to question relatives. The Johnsons were widely seen as a cheerful, loving unit. When questioned, Matt and Diane's sister Linda and Linda's husband Jim described life at home as normal. But Sarah's relationship with Bruno Santos grew into a central point of contention. Sarah, still a teenager, repeatedly defied her parents' rules, continuing to see Bruno despite prohibitions. Jim disclosed information that could have given Bruno a motive to target the family. Days earlier, Allan and Diane had learned Sarah had lied about staying at a female friend's house and had actually slept with Bruno. Allan then asked Jim to accompany him to confront Bruno, and Jim recalls Allan becoming furious and threatening to report Bruno to the authorities for assaulting Sarah while she was underage. The two men left with Sarah, aware that such an accusation could jeopardize Bruno's status in the country. Investigators, hearing this, believe Bruno might have meant to harm the Johnsons. Bruno Santos, a high school student with a couple of minor drug offenses, was questioned and became confrontational. He claimed he had proposed to Sarah and that she would accept, a claim meant to prove his deep commitment. On the morning of the incident, Bruno said he was asleep on the couch at his home, and his mother corroborated that she had been there, though the alibi was not definitive. Asked about Allan and Diane, his attitude betrayed clear disapproval of them. As the inquiry progressed, investigators weighed who stood to gain from the upheaval surrounding the family. No definitive alibi emerged, keeping the focus on Bruno and his possible connection to the earlier confrontation. The case underscored how a teenager's defiance could ripple through a household and invite grave consequences. Back at the Johnsons' house, forensic teams collected evidence from every corner, using ultraviolet light to reveal crimson traces that might indicate an escape route used by the assailant. In Sarah's room, they found crimson stains and bone fragments on a wall, a finding that deepened the enigma of the incident. The findings were sent to the lab, and investigators began to question whether Sarah's recollection matched the scene. Further searches yielded additional clues: a brown leather glove, the same one later found among the trash, a key to the guest house, and unspent .264 caliber rounds. On one of the unused rounds lay tissue matter, possibly transferred from the glove as someone attempted to hide signs. Forensics tested the items, and investigators began to suspect Bruno might have been involved in the fatal act against Allan and Diane Johnson and had urged Sarah to help conceal clues. Bruno and his mother were served a warrant to search the home, and all clothing he wore that day, including his shoes, were gathered for testing. His fingerprints were taken, and he was transported to hospital for a DNA sample, with hair clippings and hand scrapings also collected. Bruno was named the leading suspect in the Johnsons' case involving Allan and Diane, yet investigators soon received information that could steer the inquiry in an entirely different direction. Despite exhaustive testing of the clothing and shoes, no trace of the victim's biological material was found on the items or at the scene. There were no hairs, DNA markers, or fingerprints near the bodies, and the gloves and bathrobe tested negative. The lack of physical links to Bruno left police unsure, seemingly allowing him to appear truthful. Bruno was ultimately cleared as a suspect as the case was weighed with fresh perspectives. Attention then shifted to others in Sarah's circle, and investigators began probing her family and friends about her home life. They learned she had been prescribed antidepressants and that her relationship with her parents was strained. Acquaintances described her conduct as typical teenage rebellion. Among relatives, Linda, Sarah's aunt, grew increasingly wary. During questioning, investigators noted that Sarah was not following the usual grieving pattern. Linda said Sarah seemed more eager to return to school and be with friends than to process the loss of her parents. When asked about her behavior since the tragedy, Sarah's friends described her as indifferent to what had occurred, though she appeared more fascinated with getting her nails done. They also noted she showed unusual concern for Bruno after his arrest. This odd focus led investigators to consider Sarah as a possible suspect, though the prospect was unthinkable. The Johnsons' home remained a crime scene, and Sarah's room became a second area of interest. Investigators questioned how stains had spread to that distance. A firearms specialist examined the evidence and concluded both bedroom doors were open when the incident occurred. Plumbers were called after a clog in a bathroom toilet. The source appeared to be a shower cap. Investigators interviewed Linda, Matt, and Mel Spiegel about the items they found. Linda and Matt identified a pink bathrobe as Sarah's. Mel confirmed she had a key to the guest house and often helped tidy, and that she knew about the pistol kept in the closet. To link Sarah to the evidence, they faced a challenge since eyewitnesses on the morning of the incident recalled she had no obvious signs of involvement when she ran to a neighbor. Forensic tests using luminol found no traces on the clothes Sarah wore that morning. A warrant allowed confiscation and testing of the clothes she wore that day. Meanwhile, investigators brought Sarah in for another interview to see if her story had changed. Several inconsistencies emerged. Her account differed at least 5 times. In one version, she said she slept until a loud report. In another, she claimed she woke before the first report. Yet another account placed her in her room when the second report occurred. The case file showed multiple shifts in her narrative. The investigators weighed all angles, aiming to preserve the integrity of the investigation. Sarah changed her account, saying she stood outside her parents' bedroom when the second blast rang out. She had trouble remembering whether the door to her parents' room was open or closed, but investigators remained calm as they questioned her. They already knew both doors were open, which explained the stain patterns on Sarah's wall. DNA, hair, and skin scrapings were collected to clear her name and were sent to the laboratory. The pajama top and bottom she wore that morning were also submitted for testing. Forensic specialist Rod Angert examined the robe under a high-powered microscope and found no traces on the front, but the back showed patterns of high-velocity staining. Inside the robe, he found blue cotton fibers and green paint specks that matched the shirt she had worn that morning. The decisive breakthrough came when lab results showed Sarah's DNA on the inner lining of a latex glove and residue on both brown leather gloves. The stains on the gloves and robe matched Allan and Diane Johnson, giving investigators grounds to arrest Sarah for the double homicide. On October 29, 2003, Sarah Johnson was taken into custody and held without bail at Blaine County Jail, awaiting trial. The case drew national attention, and prosecutors had to craft a plausible motive based on statements from relatives and friends. They wove a narrative of a teen driven by strong feelings, whose disapproved relationship with Bruno sparked secrecy. Days earlier, she had lied about staying with a friend while actually being with Bruno, a lie prosecutors described as the trigger. They argued this moment gave her a plan to leave her parents and start life with Bruno. As a fan of true crime, she believed she had a flawless plot. The next morning she rose, went to the guest house to retrieve the rifle, then donned latex gloves, leather gloves, and a shower cap, arranging her robe to keep any trace from touching her clothes. In February 2005, 2 years after the loss of her parents, Sarah faced trial. Her defense maintained she was innocent and argued that an intruder had carried out the acts. The prosecution presented physical evidence from the scene, including blades planted in the bedrooms to simulate an intruder and a shower cap that had become lodged in the plumbing, along with testimonies from relatives and friends about her unusual conduct since the tragedy. It emerged that she had attempted to bundle the remaining traces and discard them, hoping waste collection would remove them before investigators learned of anything. The most damning testimony came from Bruno Santos, who sought to clear himself and offered insight into Sarah's state of mind. He testified that he and Sarah had planned to marry and envisioned a life together in a large, beautiful home. Bruno also stated that Sarah often spoke of hatred towards her father and of harming him. After 5 weeks of testimony and explanations of the scene, the jury returned its verdict on March 16, 2005. Sarah, aged 18, was found guilty on 2 counts of the most serious crime. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of release at the Pocatello Women's Correctional Center in Idaho. Since sentencing, she has appealed for a reduction of the punishment, but all petitions have been denied. The remaining family members spoke publicly about their feelings towards Sarah. The loss of Allan and Diane devastated the family, and most believed Sarah bore responsibility. Her brother Matt said she showed no remorse and warned that, if freed, she might attempt the same again. Pat Dishman, Diane's mother, told Sarah's granddaughter that they still loved her, but their pain lingered. Allan's sister, Lynn Morell, described Sarah as spoiled and capable of harming others if released. This case remains one of the most twisted and disturbing in memory. The idea that someone could harm their own parents revealed a troubling self-centered streak in Sarah Johnson, leaving her brother and the family to pick up the pieces. She remains behind bars for a senseless act. In the other case, Kristen Rossum might have followed a scientist's path, but she is serving a life sentence at the Central California Women's Facility for an offense against her husband, Ralph. Together, they had 3 children who were educated in top schools, tutored, and kept active in clubs and talent programs. Yet Kristen, fragile and impulsive, struggled to keep up, skipped classes, and sought escape from reality. Initially, alcohol offered relief, but soon the remedy wore off and she grew dependent on a highly addictive stimulant. Her erratic behavior and detachment drew her parents' concern, and after a long conversation, she admitted a long-standing reliance on the substance since high school. 17-year-old Kristen secretly ran away to Mexico with friends, where she met Gregory de Villers, 7 years her senior, who seemed like a guardian. Greg fell for the wayward girl and took responsibility for her well-being, helping her secure a job at a local forensic department as a toxicology assistant. Her talents impressed both teachers and employer, and she received the Best Student Award. The relationship with Greg lasted about 5 years and culminated in a grand wedding on June 5th, 1999, which reassured her parents that she had left dependency behind. In March 2000, Kristen joined the San Diego County Medical Examiner's Office as a toxicologist, while Greg worked in the biotechnology sector. Bored with routine, she sought excitement again and began a discreet affair with a colleague named Michael Robertson, the department head who was married. Greg found letters between the lovers, and though he hoped to salvage the marriage, she resolved to end it. On the morning of Monday, November 6th, Kristen prepared for work while Greg was ill. She notified his workplace and visited him at lunch, and he slept at 9:22 in the evening. Thus, both stories trace paths from potential to consequence, illustrating how choices under pressure and longing can reshape families. On that same day, Kristen called emergency services, reporting that her husband, Gregory Delar, was unresponsive and alone at home, while she cried and paid little heed to the dispatcher's advice to examine him or offer aid. When officers and medics arrived at 10:19 p.m., they pronounced Gregory Delar's passing. He lay on the bedroom floor, his torso exposed with rose petals scattered around. The room's inspection suggested a lethal intake of several potent painkillers, with empty vials nearby and torn wedding photos on the bed. In interrogation, Kristen said she had informed Gregory about their separation the night before, 17 months after their wedding. She regretted marrying him, felt she had rushed into it, and wanted distance because he was too clingy. The death was attributed to a self-administered mix of powerful sedatives. Kristen signed the cremation papers, but Gregory's family and friends resisted the notion of such a sudden loss, noting no changes in his mood or behavior, and that he had not shared marital problems with anyone. The relatives halted the cremation and pressed for an independent autopsy, which opened the possibility of foul play. Their persistence allowed authorities to consider homicide. Toxicology later revealed an extremely high level of fentanyl, a pain reliever, about 150 times stronger than morphine, along with smaller amounts of clonazepam and trace oxycodone. The latter is an opiate often nicknamed hillbilly opiate. Investigators suspected that under the influence of clonazepam and the other substances, someone else had administered the fentanyl to Gregory. Kristen became the prime suspect since fentanyl is not an over-the-counter medication, and she had knowledge and access to such substances. At the police station, Kristen's gaunt appearance and signs of substance use, together with her statements on the day, pointed to a possible dependency. Her accounts to paramedics and to a hospital nurse were inconsistent. First, she claimed Gregory had taken no medications. Then she suggested he might have taken oxycodone at the hospital. Another time, she told a nurse he might have taken oxycodone. The police also considered the possibility that an accidental mix of cold medicines and oxycodone had contributed. In conversations with Kristen, investigators learned that Gregory was deeply unsettled by their failing marriage, a detail that intensified scrutiny of her involvement in the events. On November 8th, a colleague named Russ Lowe alerted the police to Kristen's affair with her boss, Dr. Robertson, steering the inquiry toward a possible motive tied to the pair. Investigators uncovered documents and emails showing a link between Kristen and Dr. Robertson, including shared files and articles that revealed his expertise in phenol. The case began to align as authorities suspected that Gregory could pose a risk because he knew Kristen's access to the laboratory and controlled substances, while Michael supported his partner. The authorities viewed the act as planned, with evidence suggesting Michael helped conceal Kristen's substance dependency at the time. Charges were not filed immediately. Both were dismissed from their positions for breaches unearthed during the inquiry. In January, a raid at Kristen's home found traces of substances and paraphernalia. She was arrested for the first time but released on bail. As the investigation continued, Kristen's diary came under scrutiny, with initial readings suggesting it was meant for an external reader to hide her innocence while presenting Gregory's end as staged. Medical findings indicated Gregory had been unconscious for at least 6 hours before the end, and the moment of his passing could have occurred an hour to an hour and a half earlier. A bruise around an injection site on his arm remained unexplained. At Kristen's workplace, a shortage of the substance linked to Gregory's demise and other controlled substances was detected, and police believed she had administered phenol without his knowledge. The prosecution relied on toxicological and medical data, and with sufficient circumstantial evidence, Kristen was arrested on the 25th of June, 2001, and charged with causing the end of Gregory's life. After spending 6 months in custody, she was released on bail. The trial centered on a motive to silence a threat to her reputation, with the claim that she poisoned Gregory with phenol and staged the scene by tearing diary pages and placing rose petals in a wedding photo around his body. Kristen's background in biochemistry was cited as enabling the deed, and prosecutors argued she aimed to convince colleagues in the medical examiner's office that the end was self-initiated, concealing the phenol. However, before the autopsy could proceed, she was moved to another lab, and efforts to substitute toxicology results failed. On the morning of November 6th, she notified Gregory's employer of his absence, then returned to work. Colleagues recalled she arrived around 9 o'clock. She was observed crying in Michael's office. The building manager where Kristen and Gregory lived reported that she arrived home at 12:10 p.m. At 12:41 p.m., she went to a local grocery and bought several items, including a single red rose. Credit card statements confirm this purchase occurred hours before Gregory's demise. Hours earlier, she had spoken to Michael and to Dr. Brian Blackburn, the San Diego County medical examiner who performed Gregory's autopsy. Dr. Blackburn testified that Gregory had been unresponsive for at least an hour before paramedics arrived. He explained that Gregory developed early bronchopneumonia, a condition in which secretions accumulate in the lungs when a person is unconscious or not breathing deeply. The doctor also noted Gregory's bladder held a significant amount of urine, which would have seemed uncomfortable if he had been conscious, supporting the view that he was breathing poorly for roughly 6 to 12 hours before demise. An unconscious person would not have been able to sprinkle rose petals over themselves. Dr. Blackburn added that the level of clonazepam in Gregory's blood was not an overdose and was not lethal. Dr. Theodore Stanley, testifying for the prosecution, described fentanyl as a potent, fast-acting pain reliever with a serious risk of respiratory arrest. He explained that fentanyl's onset depends on how it is given. Peak effects about 16 hours after a transdermal patch, 20 to 30 minutes after oral ingestion, 15 to 20 minutes after intramuscular injection, and within 5 minutes after intravenous injection. He noted that fentanyl is usually not given by mouth because the liver destroys about 65%, leaving about 35% to reach the bloodstream. Asked how fentanyl entered Gregory's system, neither Dr. Blackburn nor Dr. Stanley could offer a definitive answer. They reported varying concentration levels alongside signs that Gregory had been unconscious and breathing shallow for several hours, suggesting fentanyl had been administered multiple times. Although the prosecution could not prove exactly how Kristen poisoned Gregory, there were indications she might have applied fentanyl patches to his arm during sleep. The disappearance of 15 patches from the lab Kristen formerly worked at supported this possibility. The defense acknowledged that fentanyl played a role, but argued Gregory had self-administered it in despair over family issues. Kristen testified that she woke on the morning of November 6th to find Gregory distraught, and she phoned his employer at 7:42 a.m. Kristen testified that she reported Gregory's illness and that he would not be going to work. She said she went to her job but returned to the apartment to check on him in the afternoon, and they shared lunch. She then went back to work, and she got home at 8 o'clock in the evening. Gregory lay on the bed, and she assumed he was asleep. After taking a bath, she tried to wake him but found him cold, so she called emergency services. During cross-examination, the prosecutor pressed that her account seemed odd. Kristen acknowledged past false statements and admitted to drug use. He noted that fentanyl is an unusually potent substance and hard to detect, a fact she knew from her work. Forensic testimony based on the autopsy and toxicology showed that Gregory had been unconscious for roughly 6 to 8 hours, which suggested she could not have shared lunch with him that day. The defense accepted that Dr. Blackburn had shown a non-lethal level of clonazepam in the blood and argued that taking oxycodone together with clonazepam could produce a synergistic effect, perhaps meaning Gregory had taken the pills himself unknowingly. They also said the remaining question was how fentanyl entered his system and why its level was elevated. After 8 hours of deliberation, the jury found Kristen responsible for the act that ended Gregory's life and for the special circumstances involving poison. She received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Kristen maintained her innocence and appealed, contending that errors had affected her defense. Her counsel conceded that fentanyl played a role, but admitted they had failed to test autopsy samples for fentanyl metabolites. Such testing could have shown whether fentanyl had been swallowed or whether laboratory contamination explained its presence in the samples later. In the appellate proceedings, it was argued that there had been a break in the chain of custody. The samples were placed in a cardboard box with containers labeled as samples from Gregory, but the containers were not sealed. The box was supposed to be delivered to the sheriff's office for transfer to an external lab, yet the designated recipient was absent, leaving the box at the examiner's office for about 36 hours before it reached the sheriff's forensic lab. The appellate court noted that anyone with access to the medical examiner's building could have tampered with the samples, meaning fentanyl could have been added after the fact. Kristen continued to insist on her innocence and pursued the appeal, arguing that these procedural flaws undercut the theory presented by the prosecution. Motives to taint evidence and mislead investigators emerged from tense ties among staff. In the Kristen Rosem case on the 8th of November 2000, Michael told a toxicologist he had examined a sample from Gregory's stomach. A 3-judge panel of the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals concluded that Kristen's lawyers erred by not challenging the claim that her husband's passing involved fentanyl. They argued that her team should have tested for fentanyl metabolites rather than accepting the characterization. The panel did not overturn the verdict, but remanded to federal court to determine whether this misstep could have altered the outcome. The Supreme Court later ruled that federal courts must respect state court decisions in such appeals. On that basis, the appellate court declined to hear Kristen's challenge. Her appeal was denied, and she remained in confinement. Michael Robertson, once her boss and partner, faced a sealed conspiracy complaint with a warrant issued. He resides in Australia as a forensic toxicology consultant. If he returns to the United States, he could be held on $100,000 bail. Gregory's family filed a civil suit against the county, alleging negligence that allowed Kristen to lift a lethal dosage from the medical examiner's office undetected. In 2006, a federal court awarded them $147 million in civil damages, a verdict that drew nationwide attention. Rosem, a former toxicologist at the same office, received a life sentence without the possibility of parole in 2003 for stealing substances from the lab and arranging a scene at the couple's apartment intended to mislead investigators. This is followed by the story of 26-year-old Elle Edwards, who on Christmas Eve 2022 was celebrating with friends in a pub in Alley Village, Liverpool, England. She worked as a cosmetologist at a local beauty salon and assisted a dermatologist, and her bright, generous nature won over even the most demanding clients. On December 24, 2022, her sister Lucy arrived from Dubai to share the holidays, and the two headed to the nearby pub with friends, enjoying laughter, dancing, and karaoke. Yet, unseen in the merry crowd was a man with a cold demeanor who lingered nearby around 11:50 in the evening. An emergency call arrived as patrons gathered at a pub. At least 12 rounds were fired and 2 bullets struck Elle. She sustained a head injury from a bullet, which proved gravely serious. The dispatcher directed responders to the scene. They arrived promptly, loaded the woman into an ambulance, and rushed her to the local hospital. She did not survive the trip. When police informed her family, they were in disbelief, unable to grasp how this could happen to Elle. In the early stages, detectives had no leads. The assault came without warning, and the perpetrator vanished as mysteriously as they appeared, leaving only a scene behind. Was Elle the target, or a random victim of a madman? An unknown car stopped near the pub entrance, and moments later a volley of rounds was unleashed. In addition to Elle, other men were wounded with injuries of varying severity. All were young, aged 22 to 33, residents of nearby towns. Initially, police theories pointed to a random victim, but the area was known to host criminal groups, making a routine confrontation among members a possibility. Yet all of this remained speculation to be proven in the investigation. Investigators began to examine Elle's character and relationships, while witnesses and relatives expressed confusion about who might have wanted her harm. Officers interviewed more witnesses and victims of the unknown assailants. Police also sought video from the pub's surveillance system. Dozens of people had to be questioned and hours of footage reviewed. Several officers worked on the extensive inquiry, facing challenging questions. Was this a spontaneous outburst or a targeted act? Checking mobile communications data required time. The media were notified to assist in gathering information. Police appealed to anyone with information to come forward, especially if they had videos showing the car used by the attacker. A meeting with local residents was held to encourage sharing any useful details. People with valuable information were urged to share it with law enforcement, as it seemed someone might have witnessed the moment of the attack or know the perpetrator. Residents were encouraged not to fear the criminals or the ongoing feuds among local clans. Community leaders stood with residents during this difficult period. Activists went door to door, speaking with neighbors. Specially trained officers worked with the victim's family to provide support after the heavy loss. From these efforts, it emerged that the attacker left the pub parking lot in a dark-colored car. Witness accounts varied, and it was hard to discern details in the darkness, but the most plausible description matched a sedan. Later, outdoor surveillance footage confirmed this. The assailant did not immediately discharge rounds. Instead, he drove to the parking lot and watched the pub's visitors for several minutes, sitting to gain a clear view of the entrance and much of what happened inside. He appeared to be waiting for a convenient moment for the attack. After a few minutes, when Elle stepped out, the assailant quickly exited the car, discharged 12 rounds, and vanished behind the wheel. Investigators, after reviewing the footage, concluded the attacker had left the scene alive. No one assisted him, and tracing his exact escape route proved impossible. They canvassed the neighborhood, describing the car and recounting the events to identify the culprit. Around-the-clock patrols yielded results. 2 days later, detectives detained 2 suspects, though no names were released until inquiries clarified. The involvement of these individuals could not yet be proven, especially since the weapon used was not recovered. Public statements assured residents that investigators would press on until the unknown shooter was brought to account. Authorities suggested the attack could have been tied to a feud between local gangs, making Elle appear a random target. Further, police indicated that potential targets might have included Jake Dudley and Kiram Seld, members of the Beechwood gang, who had spent that evening in the pub and were in a long-running dispute with another group claiming the same turf. On December 29th, police arrested another person, but he was not the one who opened fire, and he had a solid alibi that ruled him out. The detectives continued the investigation. Authorities suspected his involvement in the setup of the attack around the time the dark Mercedes linked to the perpetrator left the pub's parking lot, but lacking direct evidence, the third suspect's name was not released. There were difficulties with the recovered car. It was traced by video surveillance and identified thanks to cameras, yet police arrived too late. On December 31st, police were alerted to a fire near the crime scene. Emergency services found a vehicle burning, the flames consuming it. The car was completely burned, and valuable evidence was lost in the blaze. The perpetrators evidently knew the police were on their trail and chose to destroy a direct piece of evidence. Although the fire did not fully destroy the car, it was confirmed to have been used in the incident. The Mercedes did not belong to the attackers, but had been stolen shortly before the assault. The arson seems intended to hinder the investigation. After the events of January 11th, two more suspects, a 22-year-old man and a 23-year-old woman, were brought to the police in Central Wales. The man was named Connor Chapman, a figure already known to the police with a criminal record spanning 5 years. Chapman hailed from Birkenhead, near Liverpool, and his parents had left him early, grandparents later taking custody. The teenager dropped out of school shortly before exams and was repeatedly described as a problem child. He first appeared in court in 2004 at 14, charged with shoplifting. In 2016, he was implicated in car theft after being found in a stolen vehicle, lacking a driver's license or insurance, which violated the terms of a suspended sentence. In 2017, car theft was added to charges involving possession of prohibited substances. During this period, he remained under police supervision, repeatedly breaching the restraining order and, as a result, being barred from several parts of the city. Connor was not allowed in public places because his presence was deemed a threat to society. In 2019, he breached the ban again. Patrols detained him in a public place while he carried a sharp instrument and prohibited substances. The same year, Connor Chapman first came to public notice when he appeared in the local press after a failed attempt to flee from police in a stolen car. The city patrol spotted a stolen Audi and ordered the driver to stop and exit with hands up. But 18-year-old Chapman refused, triggering a short pursuit. He racked up a large number of traffic violations. He accelerated to over 80 kilometers per hour in a zone limited to 30. He repeatedly drove into oncoming traffic and at last crashed into the curb. The car was flung aside and turned around. The driver jumped out and ran, yet was caught a few hundred meters away in the bushes. In his defense, he claimed he was waiting for a friend, but the deception was evident. Chapman's lawyer stated in court that his client had fallen under the influence of a bad crowd. The court did not punish him at that time and instead noted attention deficit disorder and several other conditions diagnosed by private specialists. Nevertheless, because of numerous violations and dangerous road behavior, he was sentenced to a term of up to 8 months in prison, with 2 months to be served, and was also given a driving ban to take effect after release. By the time he reached adulthood, it was clear he had no intention of reform and refused to integrate into society. Everyone understood his potential danger, yet there were no legal grounds to isolate him, since, at that point, no one had been seriously harmed by his actions. Public outcry grew as authorities appeared powerless to stop him from acting. The pattern suggested that criminal elements could continue until they harmed innocent people, which, indeed, began to materialize. In January 2020, the court once again sentenced Connor Chapman, this time to 10 months in prison for similar offenses. He was again found in a public place with a sharp instrument and prohibited substances in his possession. During that period, police publicly urged vigilance on television. After serving his term, he again engaged in criminal activity and remained wanted for at least 5 offenses. Connor Chapman built a grim reputation as a young offender who spent more time behind bars than at large. By 20, his record showed 19 sentences for 43 crimes. In the summer of 2022, he was released again, 6 months before L. Edwardson's passing. During this period, his lawyer urged pity, telling how his first child was born while he was behind bars and how his partner carried a daughter. He claimed to have reconsidered his life and to seek a path of correction, but those words rang loud and hollow. His true aim was freedom to resume crime. The police already knew he belonged to a local gang involved in distributing prohibited substances, yet the case against him centered on burglary and the theft of 2 electric motorcycles. On December 24th, a clash between rival gangs near the wooden church in Beechwood Estates failed to settle their turf dispute, and the young man armed himself with a firearm, waiting about 3 hours to locate his targets. He spotted Karen Seld and Jake Duffy, who had gone to the Moac pub for a drink and moved from the parking area. He sprang from the car and fired 12 rounds into the building. Duffy sustained serious injuries but survived, while Elle Edwardson succumbed to her injuries at the hospital. The pub had been crowded and 1 person lost life while 4 others were wounded, 1 man in the leg, another in the arm, and a 3rd in the wrist. None of the injuries were considered life-threatening. Elle's friends attempted resuscitation at the scene but could not save her. Elle's sister Luke, who lived in Dubai, came home for Christmas, but minutes before the assault she had left the venue. She later recalled wanting to take her sister with her, yet she stayed with friends. On January 25th, 2023, Elle's funeral took place at the local church, with hundreds of people saying their goodbyes. The coffin arrived on a ceremonial procession drawn by 4 white horses, and the Moac pub was closed that day in respect. The owner posted a message of support for Elle's family on his official page. Chapman faced a long list of charges, the primary one alleging that he caused the loss of life. An accomplice, 20-year-old Thomas, was identified, and a video captured him receiving a firearm from Chapman and hearing him vow to settle scores. After the attack, the pair hid the stolen Mercedes to dispose of it. The firearm itself was never recovered, but Chapman's DNA was found on a shell casing. Red gloves discovered at his home matched footage from the morning after, when the pair had left the scene and arranged a taxi under a false name to mislead investigators. Around 5 a.m., they sought to evade capture. They returned to the spot where the hidden car lay. The assailants tried to erase their traces, yet something went wrong, and they resolved to dispose of the vehicle by setting it ablaze. Thomas Nord was found guilty on all charges in July 2023, and he received a 9-year term, a modest sentence reflecting his shorter criminal record compared with his accomplices. Jake and Karen were wounded during the incident but survived. A look at their lifestyle showed why tensions between rival groups could escalate into violence. Both belonged to the local Beechwood gang, which openly clashed with a second group over the territory. On the 23rd of December 2023, a day before the firearm attack, they had already been attacked by someone from Connor Chapman's circle. The 2 were beaten, though not seriously hurt. Apparently, they viewed that as a random clash and went to relax at a pub, while the shooter awaited his sentence in the case involving the victim. The targets were already behind bars. Karen received 27 months for attacking members of the rival group, with an additional 9 months for the brawl. Her associate was given 2 years and 9 months for a similar offense. Prohibitive orders with numerous conditions were issued, though such measures failed to shield the public from the criminal faction. If violations continued, harsher penalties could follow due to ignoring the orders. Public concern grew as those linked to the gang appeared to escape with light sentences after each incident, and the deterrent value of the sanctions seemed minimal. It became clear that Chapman already had a ban prohibiting visits to the area, yet he managed to reach the venue by taking a car despite a separate driving ban. These events revived calls for tougher penalties and a review of legal standards, yet no substantial reform has taken place. In the trial concerning Elle, Connor attempted to deny that he appeared on the CCTV image. He claimed he was at home packing Christmas gifts, but substantial evidence contradicted him. The hearing spanned 3.5 weeks, revealing the sequence of events leading up to the assault. As the investigation unfolded, it emerged that the motive was simply rivalry over the territory between Beechwood and the rival faction. In a city torn by feuds between 2 rival gangs, Connor found himself indifferent to the bar's patrons, including a young woman whose life was cut short. His rage was a blind force he could not control, and after striking at 2 rivals, he planned to slip away to Spain to erase his tracks. He used a stolen car and disposed of the instrument, hoping to avoid apprehension. Detectives arrested him at the airport, and during custody he tried to mislead investigators, insisting the Mercedes seen that day was not taken but part of the group's ordinary fleet. He claimed he wasn't behind the wheel and that he hadn't opened fire that evening. He added that he had only just learned that someone from the group had used the vehicle for an assault at the bar. When the jury retired to deliberate, the victim's father spoke briefly, hoping the man would never again share Christmas with his loved ones in freedom. After 3 hours of deliberation, the jurors Pishin and Simpson returned a unanimous verdict. Connor Chapman was guilty on all counts, having acted with cold calculation and showing no remorse for taking the life of the 26-year-old woman who had so much ahead. Rather than remorse, he spent days erasing traces that could link him to the scene. The motive lay in the rivalry between the criminal outfits competing for control. On the 7th of July, 2023, he received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 48 years. Victor, the victim's father, raised his fist in a gesture of triumph as the verdict was read. The case sparked public outrage and left residents uneasy about being caught in the crossfire between factions. They knew these groups possessed a large arsenal and were willing to use it, as the bar incident had shown. Victor announced plans to establish a foundation to support people harmed by such violence, with the goal of reducing civilian access to firearms. The England family appeared outwardly flawless, sharing Sunday worship as a sign of devoutness, yet few could imagine the secrets hidden behind the doors of this household. The tale of Billy Mann and his wife Sandra began in 1983 when they met at church. He was 18 and she 16, and with their parents' blessing, they soon wed and settled in the small town of Logan, Ohio. A deeply religious builder, Bill devoted his spare time to service at the Evangelical Church of the Tabernacle of Faith near Nelson Villa. There he played musical instruments while Sandra, a homemaker, supported his spiritual pursuits. In 1984, the couple welcomed their firstborn son, William Jr. The church community nicknamed the father Bill and the son Will. As the years passed, Will grew up under their watchful eyes. In 2001, when he turned 17, he met 15-year-old Summer Cook during a church service. Their meeting resembled Bill and Sandra's earlier courtship. They dated for 3 years, and when Summer reached adulthood in 2004, they married. The newlyweds moved in with Will's parents into a spacious Logan house, and that same year, 39-year-old Bill proclaimed himself a spiritual leader, turning his garage into a makeshift church. Though locals were skeptical, the makeshift church gradually drew parishioners. In 2005, Will and Summer became parents to a son named Alex. Financial struggles followed, and the family moved to Florida in 2006, where Bill and Will quickly found construction work, while Sandra and Summer tended the home and cared for Alex. After 2 years, they returned to Ohio, having lost the option to repurchase their former house in Logan and renting a place in the rural district of Vinton. In 2008, Will and Summer welcomed a daughter named Kaylee, and 2 years later a third child, Alana, arrived. Despite the demands of a growing family, the couple reserved time for themselves, leaving the children with Bill and Sandra, who happily took on the roles of grandparents. For the elderly couple, the grandchildren became the true meaning of life. In the spring of 2010, Bill Mann was officially named the pastor of the Church of the Tabernacle of Faith. Together with his wife, he founded Ranch of Mercy, a charitable organization to aid the underprivileged, those who had lost their jobs or homes. Bill of Ranch of Mercy envisioned building a large shelter for orphans and widows with his own hands, yet funds were scarce. To raise the needed capital, he proposed a lottery, selling tickets at $10 apiece. The winner would receive either a brand new house or $200,000, and 99 other valuable prizes would be raffled as well. Information about the lottery spread through local media, and Bill walked door to door urging participation, assuring that the proceeds would bankroll the shelter for those in need. Inman managed to sell 100,000 tickets and raise $1 million. The prize draw was scheduled for September 2010. While Bill pursued charity, Trouble brewed in the Inman's personal life. In June 2010, Summer confessed to her husband that she wanted a divorce after 6 years of marriage. She recorded a raw diary entry, admitting she felt like a slave who followed orders, loving her children but not wanting them to see their mother simply obeying someone else's will. She feared Will's reaction, worrying he might try to take the kids or threaten her, and she longed for equal time with the children. She understood his parents would oppose it, yet she believed shared custody was necessary. Summer filed for divorce and moved out with the children and essential belongings, staying with her parents. She did not want to cut off their contact with their father, so she allowed visits with Will and his parents. 2 months after leaving, she began a romance with Adam Peters, and she found work as a cleaner at a bank in central Logan, lacking other options due to limited schooling. September and October passed, but the promised lottery never took place. The prize house had not begun construction, and the organizers showed little urgency in returning tickets. In early December, the Inmans were told they must vacate their rented home due to mounting debts. Summer arrived with Adam to collect their belongings, but Will and his parents refused entry to the former daughter-in-law. Summer contacted the police, reporting that her estranged husband was threatening her and would not return her personal belongings. The halted lottery left many participants disappointed, and the Inman family found itself entangled in conflict over money and custody. When officers arrived, she refused to let anyone into the house, threatened Adam with harm, and even clashed with a police officer. In her statement, Summer recalled that before the wedding she and Will had an ideal relationship, but after marriage he changed abruptly, becoming jealous, controlling, and making baseless accusations, dictating her every move and intruding into the most private areas of life. He dictated what she ate, how household chores were done, and even their intimate life, leaving her unable to sleep unless he granted permission. Effectively under house arrest, she was forbidden to leave the home, and he confiscated her phone and keys. Summer learned that Will dreamed of 12 children with her and even planned to take a second wife, and he frequented polygamy sites where he posted explicit photos. He threatened to harm Summer if she dared to leave him. On one occasion, he took her beloved cats, drove them away, and later claimed they had escaped through an open window, laughing that she would never see them again. In response to her accusations, Will tried to justify himself, saying he took her phone and keys because he suspected she was unfaithful, and that the cats were taken to a shelter because they scratched the furniture and attacked family members. He was then ordered off fine, probation, and a court-prohibited proximity to Summer. A custody dispute erupted between the Inman and Peters families, with the Inmans filing a police report accusing Adam Peters of posing a danger to Alex, Kaylee, and Alana. A terrifying moment occurred late that evening, March 2nd, 2011, when 25-year-old Summer completed her bank shift, tidied the workspaces, and stepped outside around 11 p.m. Before that summer ended, she texted Adam, the man she planned to meet after work, but he never laid eyes on his beloved again. Worried, Adam went to the bank after midnight and found not Summer but her belongings, her phone, keys, a portable music player with headphones, and deeper in the shrubs, her jacket. He notified the police and Summer's parents. Initially, they hoped she had merely been delayed or misplaced items, but the bank's security team confirmed she had not appeared after her shift. When law enforcement arrived, witnesses were already waiting. 2 joggers said they had seen Summer being seized by unknown individuals about an hour earlier. The account described a white Crown Victoria, driven by a blonde, pulling up as 2 men in black balaclavas sprang out, grabbing Summer and forcing her into the back seat. The victim resisted, screaming for help, and one witness tried to intervene, but the female driver sprayed pepper spray in his face. The kidnappers fled with Summer. The runners rushed to the nearest station to report what they had seen. Yet for reasons unclear, investigators treated the statement with skepticism. They suspected the witnesses might have invented the tale for amusement. An hour passed after Summer's parents called, before officers reached the scene, by which time she was gone and the trail was still warm. News of the 25-year-old woman's disappearance swept through local media, and hundreds joined the search, but days passed and hope began to fade. Weeks earlier, Summer had shared a Facebook photo with Adam and their children, a picture that suggested a happy family. Seeing that image on Adam's page triggered a fierce reaction in Inman, and a quiet feud between the two men stretched back for years. It later emerged that Summer had met Adam before deciding to divorce her husband. In 2010, Peters began working for the Inmans, tending their house and yard, where he first fell for Summer. At first, she resisted Adam's advances, but eventually she gave in. Her diary later recorded that first meeting stirred temptation she could not deny. Despite a warning voice inside, she stayed and yielded, a choice she later regretted. That encounter became the end of Summer's marriage, for she realized she deserved happiness and love, and she filed for divorce 5 days before her disappearance. Will challenged the alimony, asking the judge to reduce it to $50 per child, arguing that his income was merely $6,500 a month. Bill, with his parents, pressed for sole custody, but the court refused their request. The elderly couple longed for their grandchildren, who had given meaning to their lives, and after Summer's disappearance, they grew thin and worn. In March, shortly after Summer vanished, investigators found the Inmans, Bill, Sandra, and Will, hiding in Bill's mother's home, a 70-year-old woman from Jackson County, Ohio. In interrogation, all three maintained they were not involved, claiming they had driven to Cleveland to view a new house. Their car broke down, and they spent the night repairing it, returning to Logan at dawn. They said they had always treated Summer well and rarely argued, but ever since an intruder named Alan Peters appeared in their home, a dark streak had begun. Bill, Sandra, and Will described Adam as a bad person who had destroyed a once happy and strong family. Authorities focused on a Ford Crown Victoria parked near the Inmans. They seized its GPS and retraced the route. It showed that on the afternoon of March 22nd, the car was in Logan. At 5:30 p.m., the GPS was turned off, and it stayed off until the next morning, March 23rd, when it reappeared in Logan. There was no evidence of a trip to Cleveland, and telephone records indicated the suspects remained in Logan through the night. Later information arrived for the morning of March 23rd at 7:30 a.m. Bill, Sandra, and their son Will were spotted at a car wash where the vehicle received a full interior cleaning, and Summer was not with them. They then drove to Cleveland to replace tires at an auto shop, and the mechanic found it unusual that Bill swapped nearly new tires for older ones, reportedly because he disliked the previous set. The family also tried altering the car's appearance, with Bill removing a police spotlight mounted near the side mirror. After their arrest, Bill tried to reassure his elderly mother that they were innocent and that the investigations were a form of divine punishment. Hours of questioning later, realizing they faced grave consequences, Sandra confessed that they had abducted Summer. The men in balaclavas were her husband, Bill, and her son, Will. Sandra said the kidnapping was her idea, meant only to scare Summer so she would allow the grandchildren to be seen. When Summer was placed in the car, Will bound her wrists, ankles, and neck with plastic ties, and she fought and screamed until she fainted. While the family searched for the blade, Will shouted for his mother to bring the tool. It was too late to save Summer, as she had perished from suffocation. Sandra maintained they did not intend to end her life, only to intimidate her to settle a custody dispute so the grandparents could see the children, at least on weekends. On March 29, 2011, Sandra revealed where the body had been hidden, in an abandoned well on church grounds. The Church of the Tabernacle of Faith near Nelsonville, about 30 kilometers from the bank where Summer worked. Bill had helped build that church, and 28 years earlier he and Sandra had wed beneath its arches. When authorities lifted the well's cover, Summer lay at the bottom, dressed in the same shirt as the last day, a black t-shirt bearing the line, "I don't have an anger problem, I have an idiot problem." The autopsy concluded she perished from asphyxia, due to strangulation, with no other injuries beyond the marks from the ties on her neck, wrists, and ankles. Sandra admitted her guilt and expressed genuine remorse, while Bill and Will, aged 49 and 28, did not plead guilty to Summer's fate, spoke little during the hearings, and avoided their in-laws' gaze. Sandra attempted to shoulder all responsibility, claiming the plan originated with her. In her final statement, she pleaded forgiveness to Summer's parents, her voice torn with tears. Yet many understood that she sincerely regretted what happened. Summer seemed like a daughter to me. If I could turn back time, I would never have taken this dreadful step. In 2012, the court handed down sentences. Bill and Will Inman received life terms with no possibility of early release. Sandra received life with parole, possible after 15 years. Church friends and parishioners agreed that Bill controlled the family, and few believed the idea came from Sandra. Will had been spoiled since childhood, with his parents indulging every whim. The defendant knew her husband and son shared the guilt, yet she persisted in bearing the blame to the end, hoping to soften their fate. Alex, Kay, and Alana were raised for a long time by Summer's late parents, unable to tell their grandchildren where their mother, father, grandmother, and grandfather had gone. The Inman tragedy serves as a warning about how hidden anger, jealousy, and a desire to control another's life can lead to dire outcomes. Bill and Sandra, once seen as models of piety and family values, proved to be harsh rulers for their daughter-in-law. Summer became a casualty of a toxic relationship where her will was crushed and attempts to escape ended in ruin. Will, raised in such a suffocating atmosphere, grew obsessed with reclaiming his wife and children, and his fixation culminated in an act that shattered several families, depriving 3 young children of their mother and leaving the grandparents without their closest relative. Emily Longley was born in England in 1994 to Mark and Caroline Longley. 2 years later, her sister Hannah was born. The 2 girls shared a close, loving bond. The family moved to New Zealand, making Auckland their home, when Emily was 9 and Hannah 7. After drifting toward the wrong crowd, Emily's middle-class parents sent her back to the United Kingdom to live with their own parents. In 2010, Emily traveled to England to study at a local college, pursuing a business degree and dreaming of becoming a model. She stayed with her grandparents in Bournemouth, a coastal town in Dorset near Poole. When Emily moved to England, Hannah remained in New Zealand. Emily attended school, and her parents, Mark and Caroline, divorced but remained on friendly terms. She was a striking young woman who attracted plenty of attention. One day she met 20-year-old Elliot Turner, who left a strong impression on her. Gradually, their exchanges blossomed into a romantic relationship. In April 2011, Emily returned to New Zealand to visit her family, whom she had not seen for about 6 months. Her father met her at the airport. She ran to him and hugged him, telling him she had missed him. Emily shared a close bond with her father, who loved her deeply and missed her smile, laughter, and playful humor. The next day, the family went to Emily's favorite pizzeria. She told them that besides college, she pursued modeling and had made wonderful friends. And she mentioned the man she was dating, 20-year-old Elliot Turner. They had been dating only a few months, and she felt she was too young for a serious commitment. Before leaving, she said she might end the relationship when she returned home. Over the following weeks, she enjoyed time with friends and family, had a wonderful time, and no one suspected what lay ahead. When her flight began boarding, saying goodbye was hard, but she promised to be back in 5 months to catch the Rugby World Cup matches scheduled to begin on September 9th. A few days later, while texting her father, Emily informed him that she had broken up with Elliot but did not go into details. Elliot's behavior grew unsettled after seeing Emily's photos on social media, with other men in the pictures causing his jealousy. Elliot Turner, 20 years old and the son of a wealthy jeweler, led a carefree life. He was well known in the local bar and club scene in Bournemouth and Poole, and he belonged to a circle of wealthy young men they called the Firm. Turner enjoyed being the center of attention and did not need to work, as his parents provided everything. He manipulated people, including his own parents, and his life revolved around parties, women, alcohol, and illegal substances. He carried a hammer with him in case anyone contradicted him. Their story paints a portrait of a volatile dynamic between 2 young people in a controversial social circle. Turner fancied himself a gangster and longed to be the person everyone turned to for help, strolling into bars to buy rounds for everyone. Elliot boasted about a brand new Mini Cooper, a gift from his grandmother. To burnish a rough, streetwise image, he posted a string of messages on social media, often signing as Scarface or God. He attracted plenty of attention from women, but when he met Emily, he grew deeply attached. She complimented the image he had labored to craft. As their relationship unfolded, his controlling impulses grew more frequent, and in heated exchanges he threatened to harm her. Months earlier, Emily had left a short note with 5 requests. 1, I love you. 2, do not say you will harm me. 3, stop talking about your ex-girlfriends. 4, stop being so relentlessly aggressive. 5, be more cruel, because that felt hotter to her, and your intimidation frightened her. When Turner began showing his true colors and his need for control exceeded reasonable bounds, Emily realized he was not the person she wanted by her side. Yet people like Turner often do not understand rejection. On the evening of May 6, 2011, Emily was with friends at an entertainment venue. Surveillance cameras later captured her entering a nightclub with her friends that night. Turner read her Facebook messages and learned she was seeing another man, which enraged him. He went to the club, argued with Emily, and after she tossed her drink in his face, he subjected her to verbal abuse and issued threats of violence. He disliked her outfit and dismissed that she had ended their relationship. She resolved to leave, but he followed, and his friends heard him vow he would harm her, endure prison, and still be a millionaire. Somehow he persuaded her to accompany him to his house, saying he wished to talk in a more relaxed setting. Turner lived with his parents, and perhaps she believed this would calm him. Neighbors later saw them go inside the house. The following morning, Anita Turner, Elliot's mother, phoned emergency services to report that Emily was unresponsive at 9 o'clock in the morning. Before the ambulance arrived, Anita followed the operator's guidance to assist Emily. When the paramedics reached the flat, their only option was to confirm that Emily could not be revived. Anita, an Indonesian citizen who had moved to the UK to marry Lee Turner, had sheltered her son with unwavering protection. That impulse, though loving, would prove costly. Their reluctance to deny him anything now felt like a grave misjudgment. Thousands of miles away in New Zealand, Emily's father, Mark, woke at 2 o'clock in the morning to a flood of missed calls from his ex-wife, Caroline, and their younger daughter, Hannah. A muffled message from Hannah was barely decipherable. Then Caroline's scream broke through, followed by the words, "Emily is gone." Mark could not accept it. He rang his mother in England, and when she answered in tears, his world fell apart. Moments later, a police officer delivered the awful news that Emily would not recover. He could hardly believe it, for just a week earlier she had been sitting on his sofa, smiling. The loss was a crushing blow for her parents. The police began gathering evidence, but the initial picture remained murky. The autopsy would be decisive. Anita and Lee Turner told investigators they had been at home all night and heard nothing suspicious. In the meantime, Elliot Turner publicly mourned Emily by sharing photographs of them together on his social page, though investigators had nothing firm to contradict Turner's account that Emily had simply slipped away during sleep. During inquiries, investigators sought the precise reason for this sudden end. They learned that a few days before her passing, she had posted about a stalker who claimed to know everything about her and kept pressuring for attention. On the 5th of May, witnesses recalled seeing a quarrel between Emily and Elliot Turner in a nightclub in front of several patrons. From Turner's circle, investigators learned that he tried to govern Emily's movements, attempting to control her choices and interactions. Details surfaced about her meeting with another man, and crucially, that Elliot had threatened to end her life on several occasions, though his associates treated it as bravado, intended to bolster his gangster image. The post-mortem did not establish a definite cause. Experts noted a possible strangulation, with one observation describing the findings as compatible with pressure on the neck. Detectives suspected a Turner family member and installed listening devices at the home to uncover any concealed truths. The recordings revealed Elliot instructing his mother on how to respond to police and what to say. Only his father, Lee Turner, seemed to grasp that his son's conduct was wrong, yet he eventually yielded to pressure from his son and his wife. As the surveillance continued, investigators also heard the events leading to Emily Longley's tragedy. Elliot Turner admitted his role in the fatal incident and was arrested a week later, denying guilt. His lawyers challenged the authenticity of the recordings, but the judge allowed their use as evidence. Turner said he felt anger every day and that no one had angered him as much as Emily. In the trial held in May 2012, his defense argued that the act occurred in self-defense. Turner testified that the quarrel in his bedroom turned violent and that he grabbed Emily by the neck, insisting he did not strangle her, and that he found her unresponsive in his bed the next morning. On the second day, he stated he was disgusted by his actions that night and that, after discovering she was unresponsive, he wrote a letter to his mother expressing shame and indicating plans to leave, possibly for Spain. When police arrived after the emergency call, they found packed bags and his passport in his pocket. He admitted threatening Emily and feeling deceived the night before after seeing false emails on her phone alleging he had harmed her. Describing the earlier clash, he said Emily began striking him with her hands and feet. He tried to calm her down, but eventually gave up and handed her a 20-pound note for a cab. He recalled that she ignored him at first and then suddenly grew furious, and he repeatedly urged her to stop and to calm down before the confrontation escalated. The defense pressed the question of why he acted as he did. In Bournemouth, Elliot Turner, a young man from a wealthy family, became the focal point of a troubling incident with Emily. Records from the interrogation show that he touched her neck, grabbed her, and pushed her onto the bed, then pressed on her neck while she lay down. He said he held her for 5 or 6 seconds before leaving the room. Asked if he intended to harm her, Turner replied that he did not, believing she had fallen asleep, and only realized the gravity of the situation the next morning when she did not wake. Emily's father, Mark, spoke of the pain of losing a daughter, noting that the loss is hard for anyone, and he expressed pride in the girl she was becoming. At the trial, the court heard Turner was a spoiled, affluent youth, given freedom to host gatherings in the family home in Queen's Park, Bournemouth, and to use a self-contained space in the converted garage. Investigators found on his computer searches about causing harm by neck pressure and about avoiding punishment. The main motive was jealousy. Luke Ashford, who spent the night with Emily, testified that Turner learned of it even while in custody and boasted that a jury would believe his twisted version that Emily had attacked him and that he acted in self-defense. In prison, Turner wrote of plans to drive a new Range Rover and to move to Spain, and of selling rights to his story. On May 22, 2012, the jury found him guilty and the court sentenced him to life with a minimum term of 16 years. Mrs. Justice Doss described Turner as a man of striking arrogance, while Emily was remembered as a lovely, kind, and joyful person. A girl who once brightened the lives of those she touched was abruptly deprived of life by someone who never loved her, using control rather than affection. She was treated as a trophy, and the relationship centered on dominance, exercised through aggression and threats. The case laid bare that the motive lay in a need for control, not tenderness, and the court handed Turner a life sentence. Mrs. Justice Doss also sentenced Turner to 9 months to run concurrently for perverting the course of justice. Elliot Turner was not alone in facing judgment. His parents, Anita and Lee Turner, were accused of exploiting him to fund their lavish lifestyle. They adored their son and tried to shield him, with Lee destroying his confession letter and Anita taking the jacket from the room where it lay. Anita even delayed calling an ambulance to help the cover story take shape for the police. Asked why she did not summon help, Anita said she did not believe Emily was gone. In cross-examination, they were asked whether Emily had ruined her son's life. After a 6-second pause, Anita answered no. In the recording, she was asked if they had done the right thing. Her reply was that they had. Both Anita Turner and Lee Turner, aged 51 and 54, were found guilty of perverting the course of justice and given 27 months in prison. Mrs. Justice Linda Dobbs told the pair they chose to contest the case with little remorse. Turner claimed he did not know the contents of the letter when he burned it, yet the distress in the tape released in 2013 hinted at a heavier conscience. After serving half their sentence, the couple remained in the house where Emily Longley had spent her final days. Emily's father, Mark Longley, broke down as he spoke of the verdicts, supported by his former wife Caroline and their daughter Hannah. What unfolded over 5 weeks shocked and disgusted them. He said a man so dangerous could treat a gentle girl so violently, and he was proud that Emily had come halfway around the world to build a better life. He added that Turner's boasts and the lack of timely belief in his threats had left them hoping someone had taken them seriously earlier. He hoped Turner would bear the consequences of his actions every day in prison. In October 2020, press reports noted Turner's cellmates had beaten him after he displayed photos of Emily and boasted of letters from admirers. Over several years, the case of Jordan Worth and Alex Skeel unfolded as a stark reminder of how coercive control can devastate a relationship. Worth, who possessed a fragile, almost angelic look, maintained a pattern of controlling behavior towards Skeel. She became, in British history, the first woman jailed for coercive control within a relationship, a sentence that highlighted the harsh reality of power used to dominate. Alex Skeel was born on August 17, 1995 in King, a town sheltered by a close and loving family. He and his twin brother arrived earlier than expected, spending early months in hospital in special wards for premature babies. Although Skeel faced hydrocephalus and a disability from birth, his intellect remained intact and he actively pursued sports. The brothers later attended Bedford College, supported by their parents, who spared no effort to secure a good education. For years, Skeel endured repeated harmful treatment and fear for his safety, yet he did not seek help. Only after a crisis did the full extent of the harm become clear, including that he was a father of two. The case challenged stereotypes by showing that a female partner can exercise coercive power in a relationship, and it underscored the importance of recognizing warning signs and providing support. Alexander stood out as bright and handsome, a regular at the gym, and he enjoyed success with the opposite sex. Yet he was shy by nature and far more devoted to his studies, unlike his brother who freely pursued dates and affairs. In college, Alexander met a peer named Jordan, a girl his age from a wealthy family. From early on, she was accustomed to having options, dressing in stylish, costly outfits, and maintaining an active social life. Jordan volunteered to raise funds and organize aid for local shelters for homeless animals and for children in Africa, and her efforts earned her recognition for trying to make the world better. On the surface, she seemed an angel, kind, intelligent, and beautiful. Alexander fell in love at first sight, though he initially believed such a bright, popular girl would not notice him. Yet she did notice him, and she became the initiator of their relationship. Jordan was more experienced in romance, but she was the first to win his heart. They spent so much time together that they were inseparable. In college, they were dubbed the most beautiful couple, a flattering title for Jordan. The first 6 months were filled with romance, thoughtful surprises, small gifts, and daily shared photos with captions of affection. To outsiders, it appeared they were meant for each other and a long, happy life lay ahead. Soon they decided to live together, renting an apartment, with financial help from their parents, who supported the union. Jordan admired Alexander's parents and seemed serious about a future as an art history teacher, bringing a positive impression to others. Yet time passed and Jordan's conduct began to shift. Control increased month by month. She demanded daily updates, checked his messages on his phone and social networks, and orchestrated jealous scenes in public. Alexander tried to ignore the red flags because he was in love and hoped the feelings would endure. Alexander Worth had a calm, easygoing temperament, and Jordan's early control, choosing his clothes and insisting he wear only what she bought, felt to him like care in disguise. He dismissed it as affection, but soon she narrowed his social world, deciding with whom and when he could meet and whom he could no longer contact. The isolation extended beyond friends and fellow students to his family as well. In public, they still appeared the perfect couple, perfectly photographed for social media. Jordan began to revel in her impunity, deleting contacts from Alexander's phone without his knowledge, blocking relatives and friends, and replying to messages in a rude, cutting tone. After she erased conversations, he no longer knew what had been said, and others stopped reaching out. The first alarm came from his twin brother, followed by his parents, who noted that Alexander distanced himself from them and from his beloved, avoiding visits, holidays, and calls. Every attempt to reach him met Jordan's blunt rudeness. He defended her, claiming she cared for him and meant no harm. Soon the family learned she had forced him to drop out of college, quit sports, and seek employment, while she took control of his earnings and spent them on herself. Repeated pleas from the parents changed nothing. In 2013, during the celebration of his 18th birthday at a country hotel, she and her friends celebrated, and at night she disappeared for a time. Alexander searched frantically for her and returned the next morning in a state of heavy intoxication, only to be assaulted with fists and insults, and she laughed, saying she would report him. 2 months later, she again became involved in a public confrontation in front of his family and friends. The Ski family knew a 15-year-old neighbor well enough to invite her to a family gathering. The girl, Jordan, seemed sweet when she spoke to Alexander, but then she attacked another guest, pulling her hair and scratching her face. The outburst left little doubt about her temperament. His parents and brother urged Alexander to end the relationship with the aggressive girl, and for the first time he listened. He told her he would not return to their apartment and would stay with his parents instead. The possibility of a future reunion and the birth of their shared children faded at once. About 6 months passed. Alexander returned to his studies while continuing to work and hardly thought about Jordan. On the eve of New Year's Eve in 2014, she unexpectedly called to say she was expecting and that they would become parents in the spring. He was surprised yet pleased, and she apologized for not telling him earlier, saying she thought he did not want to see her again. When they learned they would soon have a grandchild, his parents softened and invited the woman to move into the Skill family home. She married the father of her child, and 3 months later she and Alexander welcomed a son named William. The young couple and the grandparents were immensely happy, and until roughly mid-autumn 2014 they lived in harmony. For a while Jordan tried to win him over again and grew to love him anew. When William was 6 months old, she learned she was pregnant again and became capricious, demanding that they move out of the grandparents' house immediately. He attributed this to raging hormones, but agreed to rent them a place in the city, and by the summer 2015 they had a second child, a daughter named Alice. Alexander was deeply happy, carrying his wife and children in his arms, yet Jordan convinced him that he would not leave her side and began to reveal darker aspects of her character. After the move, she forbade contact with his family and kept the grandparents from seeing their grandchildren. She accepted financial help, sometimes pressing Alexander to ask his parents for more, and in a few months she bent his will, taking control of his life. She regularly belittled and insulted him, and at one point began to hit him, initially not violently as if testing how he would react, and when the escalation continued, the situation grew dangerously unbalanced. She soon learned that her husband would endure almost anything, keep silent, and let missteps go unchallenged, so she loosened the reins on her cruelty and let a cooler, more calculating penchant for harm creep into their daily life. Their strain began during the house renovation, when she grew perpetually unsatisfied with every effort he made. Alexander tried to please her, yet he felt intuitively that her standards would never be met, and a forthcoming blow to his head would crystallize that cruel dynamic. A hammer strike struck his head, leaving a deep wound and a red mark across his face as she turned away and muttered that he should move on and call no one. He asked for help or an ambulance, but she answered with cold indifference, telling him to crawl somewhere and disappear, then went back to the television as if nothing had happened. He treated the injury himself and kept silent, not seeking medical attention or speaking to anyone, because he was convinced there would be no aid returned if he did. What followed was 3 years of relentless moral and physical abuse, during which he felt he had lost the right to resist and began to step away from life outside his home. He kept working to support his family, but his wife grew more inventive in her mistreatment, escalating from crude acts to schemes that denied him rest and dignity. He was banished from their Marshall bed and relegated to the floor, lying on a bare mat without blanket or pillow, and he was forbidden to enter the kitchen, forced to eat only whatever others left behind. Jordan would seize his money, leaving him unable to buy food outside, and she would deprive him of sleep, launching new cruelties as soon as he drifted into slumber, until he woke in pain and tended himself with improvised remedies. Over time he became pale and gaunt, and her family seemed to vanish from his world as he ceased sharing news with his parents and brother, sending money to them at her insistence so she could indulge herself. Colleagues at work began to notice the toll and urged him to seek care, yet she pressured him to quit to avoid exposing what was happening. After his dismissal, he remained trapped, the abuse continuing as she tightened her control and kept him from seeking a different future. Day and night, the long-awaited deliverance seemed distant as horrors unfolded inside the couple's home. Yet those around them still believed they were a happy family, maintaining the husband's social media presence and posting old photos of them and their 2 children with captions about how deeply in love they were and how lucky they were to have found each other. No one could imagine that a woman with angelic looks and 2 children behind closed doors could harbor such danger. She knocked out her husband's teeth and carved a long, deep cut across his arm with a blade. The burns did not require immediate hospital care, and at home improvised care kept the wounds bound with food wrap and tape. Neighbors sometimes heard disturbing dreams and screams from the house, and they called the police, but Jordan repeatedly sent the officers away, persuading them that all was well. On the next visit, an officer noticed a man gripping a fresh wound, looking emaciated and bruised. The woman tried to convince the officer that her husband was mentally unstable and often inflicted injuries on himself. But this time, the police called paramedics and Alexander was taken to the hospital. Doctors were shocked by his condition. He appeared near collapse, and the arm damage threatened amputation. Alexander weighed only 94 pounds. His shoulder ligaments had been damaged by blows with a screwdriver, and a deep cut marked his forearm, with several teeth missing and many bruises. At the hospital, Jordan stormed in, demanding that her husband be handed over to her, insisting nothing terrible had happened and that he had harmed himself. Yet no one believed her, and she was taken to the station for questioning. Alexander's parents arrived to visit him, and when they reached the station, she altered her account and described in detail the harm she had inflicted. She said she had trained him like a dog and that he would not escape. She also claimed that he provoked her by cheating and by lingering in her anger, and that he was mentally ill and inclined to self-inflicted injuries. These statements clashed with the parents' accounts, and investigators prepared to pursue the case to uncover what truly occurred. After months of treatment and therapy, Alexander finally spoke about the horrors endured at home. The defendant, a 22-year-old woman, faced charges of willful infliction of grievous bodily harm, moral and physical abuse, and coercive control, and was sentenced to 7.5 years in prison. The presence of 2 young children did not lessen the severity of the punishment. The case shocked the United Kingdom and was without precedent. The children remained in the care of their father and their paternal grandparents while the mother served her sentence. Having recovered from years of torture, Alexander turned toward helping others and became engaged in community work to support victims of domestic violence. On the 4th of July, 2023, after serving 5 years of her sentence, the woman was released on parole. She was forbidden to approach her former spouse or their joint children and was reported to be engaged to a bricklayer named Adam Death with plans to become a mother again. That night, Jordan pursued Zara for about half a mile, a haunting persistence. Zara, unaware of the danger, continued on her way until a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness, gripped her by the neck, muffled her screams, and dragged her into a forest thicket. What followed was a brutal assault lasting 9 minutes, a nightmare that shattered her sense of safety and left behind only the memory of fear. When it ended, the attacker returned home, leaving behind a scene of destruction and despair that would haunt those nearby. Yet this may only be the starting point of a darker, more enigmatic story, for the truth about that terrible night could prove more puzzling than it first appeared. Secrets buried in the past can erode lives and the fragile hope that endures beside them. Delving deeper may yield answers, but it also raises more questions. In the winter of 1986, Zara Alina was born in the vast landscape of Great Britain, the first of 5 children born to a single mother who had moved her life from the Pakistani slums to this corner of the country. In 1968, in the United Kingdom, Zara embodied her parents' hopes as the first granddaughter of R. Parvin, and her birth carried a special meaning for the family. She grew up surrounded by relatives who placed her on a pedestal, showering her with tenderness and care. Despite limited finances, her parents poured everything into her education, believing it would unlock a future she could shape. From early childhood, she studied at a unique school of life where rules were harsh and betrayals ran deep, and her life moved beneath the shadow of the city's hidden ambitions. From the start, a fierce hunger for life burned in her, and she entered the world of tap dancing, where every movement sounded like a note in a symphony of passion, birthing beauty and harmony. Swimming offered another avenue of freedom, a way to escape the gray routine and feel the sea of possibility. She dressed with exquisite flair, turning herself into a living work of art and beginning a lifelong habit of presenting her dreams in style. When she first skated, she tasted a fresh breath of liberty. Skating became more than a hobby, a language through which she expressed her deepest self. Among those who knew Zara, a lawyer's calling was hardly surprising. Her heart yearned to shield and assist others, a bright ray of hope in a world shadowed by hardship. Her friendly nature sparkled with joy, contagious like a spark in the dark, and her eyes promised miracles. Her black curls seemed made to tempt fate, and her presence carried an irresistible charm, a blend of passion, kindness, courage, and a striking allure. In her teens, she traveled across England, visiting museums and galleries, and these trips signaled her growing independence. Later journeys across Europe deepened her appetite for adventure, a trait she inherited from her relatives. It seemed she was following in the footsteps of her Aunt Farah, who chose Portugal over the United Kingdom. It was inspiring for a young woman to observe her aunt at work as a psychotherapist within women's organizations, a role Zara visited several times after finishing high school. Her aspirations began to take shape when she entered the University of Westminster, and she pursued her goals with determination while caring for her mother and grandmother. Her slender frame concealed a fervent spirit and boundless energy, and her sense of justice and equality extended beyond her own circle. Zara stood out in the bustling room, not with loud ambitions, but with a quiet generosity that drew people to her. She championed refugees fleeing danger and used her voice to empower the less fortunate, while also volunteering in community canteens to help the homeless. She possessed a steadfast ability to notice the needs around her and weave them into her schedule, so no one felt left out. Easygoing and warm, she kept in close touch with her Aunt Smin, visiting often during exam preparations, where study sessions routinely dissolved into laughter. A mark of her character was the light she left behind, joy that lingered in the memories of those who knew her. Zara worked hard to cover her own costs and to support her family, balancing duties at a local clothing shop with a breadth of acquaintances, from teenagers to the elderly, whom she greeted with genuine kindness and a readiness to help. Although she could talk for hours, she never neglected listening to others. Her generosity extended to all living beings, and her affection for cats was well known. She would sometimes use her own money to take stray cats to the veterinarian or persuade neighbors to give them a home. Her friend Sanji Naira described her as radiant, believing that Zara's greatest gift was an infectious optimism. When Sanji faced a bad mood, Zara offered comfort and perspective. In Carissa Peters, she found not only a friend but a partner in the fight for justice and the protection of women from violence and abuse. Their shared dedication to women's rights bound them together through difficulties, and they seemed to share a single soul. They could slip into each other's homes as if they offered mutual shelter from life's storms, and they spoke almost daily about news, ideas, and plans for the future. In 2002, after passing her exams and completing an internship in law, Zara joined the Crown Prosecution Service, a crucial milestone on her dream of becoming a fully qualified attorney. She worked with tireless focus, even when concerns for her mother and grandmother and financial strain interrupted her studies. This step mattered not only to her, but also to Carissa and to all who believed in her, supporting her through the challenging journey toward a brighter horizon. On her first day, she sent a cheerful selfie to friends and family, signaling a new era in her life. It was more than a job. It felt like the final piece of a lifelong mosaic, a culmination of a dream she had pursued for so long that happiness almost seemed surreal, A role that might appear modest to some, an administrator, felt tremendously significant to her as a bridge to the future she had always imagined. For Zara, this marked a giant step toward her goal. At 35, she sensed a new stage unfolding in her life, and it drove her heart with unusual urgency. It wasn't merely another workday. It signaled a new era when she felt fulfilled and joyful. The new job boosted her confidence that it was time to build a family of her own. She imagined her future children, how they would be safe and cherished, thriving in a world filled with love and harmony. In that moment, she understood that each new day moved her closer to happiness and to the dream of a family of her own. Between work, volunteering, friends, and the attentive care of her mother and grandmother, with whom she shared a separate room when needed, Zara tried to balance it all. She loved walking, moving freely, and she could slip a spare pair of shoes into her bag for a quick change when needed. She believed in a woman's right to unrestricted mobility and that no one should deny her that right. Yet near her home lived a man named Jordan McWeeny, younger and of unknown origins, whose presence seemed to erode that freedom. One Saturday evening after sunset, she planned to meet a friend, not in the best of moods, but unwilling to cancel. Her word was steel strong, and she kept her promises, never letting mood dictate action. Her devotion to her friends was steady. Before leaving, she phoned Aunt Farah, whose anxious voice did not go unnoticed. The aunt urged caution. She felt the world could feel strange that night, even if she didn't stray far, and she warned herself to be vigilant. She believed her name was familiar to those who had noticed her, yet something about the evening quickened her pulse, and she resolved to be extra careful. They met at a local bar, the Ilford Big Spoon on London's West End. Ilford is a lively, diverse area, a fitting place for dinners and gatherings. Afterward, they moved to another bar, with Zara sipping water while Jordan drank steadily at a nearby club, his mind wandering toward a troubling plan to approach a woman with harmful intent. CCTV later captured his unsolicited advances outside the club, hugging women without consent and attempting to kiss them. He persisted with one employee despite clear reluctance and was escorted out around 11 o'clock, his behavior recorded on the footage. Leaving, his movements were captured as he tailed a lone passerby along Romford Street toward a park. The woman tried to evade him by entering a shop. He waited outside, then trailed her again after she left, eventually losing sight as she reached her home. Surveillance noted this sequence around 2 o'clock in the morning. On Cranber Street, Jordan noticed a woman approaching and quickened his pace. 2 passing witnesses observed his unusual conduct, and the woman nevertheless reached home unharmed, leaving him surprised and annoyed. He returned to Cranber Street empty-handed. That night, Zara and her friend left the bar. The friend took a taxi, while Zara, preferring the short walk in good weather, chose to head home on foot. They parted, and Zara walked down the Cranbrook Street, a 10-minute journey from her house. Jordan saw her, and Chief Inspector Dave Williams stated that he clearly intended to strike that night regardless of location. Cranber Street remained busy even in the early hours with constant traffic. By 13, Jordan had already been sentenced in Kent Juvenile Court for offenses committed between 2006 and 2009. In August 2010, at age 17, he was found guilty of assaulting a girl, leaving her with a swollen eye, and received 4 months in detention and correction. 11 years later, he assaulted another woman and was banned from approaching a woman for 3 years. By then, he had 28 convictions for 69 crimes, including theft, assaults on police and the public, motor vehicle theft, traffic violations, bail offenses, and shoplifting. On his page on a well-known social network, he boasted about a large collection of weapons and celebrated a criminal lifestyle, posting photos and quotes. He also uploaded fake pictures claiming the FBI was looking for him. On the 17th of June 2022, he was released on parole after serving time for criminal damage, racially aggravated harassment, and illegal carrying of a bladed weapon. One condition required meetings with a parole officer. Jordan settled into a van on St. Valentine Street in a 130-acre park in the south of Gun Hill, the largest green space in London's Redbridge district. He again violated the terms and missed 2 parole officer meetings. As a result, the parole service began the process of returning him to prison on the 22nd of June 2022, but police were not immediately informed. Early on Saturday morning, police went to his mother's house to arrest him and found he was not there around 2:30 a.m. On June 26, 2022, the streets of Ilford bore witness to a grievous assault. Zara lay on the pavement, her belongings scattered as if the turmoil in her life had spilled into the street. Bruises darkened her frame, her clothes were torn, and her eyes spoke of a struggle for survival. A passerby, recognizing the gravity of the moment, began chest compressions and rescue breaths, determined to offer her one last chance, but despite the help of bystanders and emergency responders, her injuries proved too severe. At 9:58 a.m., Zara succumbed, leaving behind the trace of a brutal struggle. Around 11 o'clock a.m., surveillance footage from the park captured the suspect, Jordan, discarding items along the route with a cold, detached air. It was clear this was not a random act of violence. The police acted swiftly, visiting Zara's grandmother to confirm the victim's identity, using footage captured by a nearby bar. When she identified Zara, officers explained what had happened. Zara's uncle Kasim Molina alerted the rest of the family, and in Portugal, Aunt Farah recalled the late-night call after sharing the news with her children. She immediately flew to London. The family trembled in shock, finding it hard to eat, sleep, or speak, and they struggled to mention Zara's death while trying to cope with the loss. Detectives began their inquiry at the place where Zara was found, reviewing surveillance footage to trace the attacker's movements. Along with fingerprint evidence recovered near the scene, they identified Jordan. They tracked his location through a network of cameras. After circulating the images of the main suspect, Inspector Dave sent an officer to Gun Hill to see if anyone recognized Jordan. The effort paid off almost immediately. Jordan was found asleep in his van and was apprehended without resistance. In his trailer, officers recovered clothing and footwear bearing traces, items he had been attempting to discard. Hours of questioning yielded no information about his identity or background. Meanwhile, new footage continued to surface, helping investigators reconstruct the sequence of events. A parole officer, Justin Russell, noted several concerns in how the case had been handled, and records showed that Jordan had been involved in criminal activity since the age of 16, marking him as a high-risk offender. He had been in the care system since the age of 16, yet his treatment was inadequate, and authorities should have sent him back to prison after he missed supervision appointments upon release from detention. On the 29th of June, the police issued a statement describing Zara's family's shock at the events of the preceding days. For the family, the loss was irreparable, though they found some comfort in the warmth and kindness shown by others, which testified to Zara's enduring spirit. Aunt Farah spoke to the media and met with investigators, drawing on her own experience to steady the narrative and shield Zara from ungrounded media claims. A preliminary hearing in the Jordan case opened on the 1st of July 2022, and another date to prepare testimony was set for the 30th of September. But on the day set for the trial, Jordan did not appear because of a positive test for COVID-19, and the hearing was postponed. On the 2nd of July, a memorial service organized by the family accompanied Zara on the way home, a solemn procession with many attendees dressed in white. More than 120 organizations supporting women joined in solidarity against violence, alongside other groups working with Zara Alina's family who pressed for justice and accountability. At a preliminary hearing before the East London court in Walthamstow, crime scene investigator Nadia Purritt said there were grounds to believe local officers could and should have acted sooner to locate Jordan, and she urged the jury to decide. She added that the investigation should have reviewed the actions of probation staff, a process expected to last about a month. On the 16th of November 2022, Jordan again failed to attend the hearing, which was held by video link after his absence, and he pleaded guilty. Prosecutor Oliver Glasgow described him as unsuitable for bail, a view echoed by Judge Chima Grove, and the verdict was postponed to the 14th of December, after which he received a life sentence. A suspect received a lengthy term of 33 years behind bars for the act that ended Zara Alina's life. On appeal, the judge noted that Zara had been unconscious and did not suffer, a factor in the adjustment of the sentence. 4 months later, it emerged that Jordan had a private relationship with a woman employed by Belmare Correctional Services in South London, though she was not a direct prison employee. The Metropolitan Police announced that a 32-year-old woman, whose identity was not disclosed, was arrested on suspicion of misconduct in public office. Zara Alina's family remember her with love and pride, and they continue to miss her. In March 2023, Aunt Farah joined a march organized by diverse groups seeking to spotlight violence against women and girls, moving from the commercial district of West London to Trafalgar Square. Protesters asserted that inaction against male violence resembles state neglect toward the vulnerable. The tragedy has added dark shades to the broader picture of violence that weighs on those who strive to change the world. The case of Lori Sars, the pregnant woman found in a city landfill, shows how a small lie can trigger grave consequences. Behind every falsehood there is a motive, whether to avoid punishment, gain advantage, or simply preserve appearances. In Lori Sars' story, a minor deception began a chain of events that ended in catastrophe, starting with her mysterious disappearance in 2004 and a public search that captured national attention when her husband, Mark Hacking, reported her missing. As the truth surfaced, the case drew intense media interest and became the subject of several talk shows and feature films. Lori Sars, also known by her married name Lori Hacking, was born in 1976, and her disappearance shed light on the destructive power of deceit on families. On New Year's Eve in Fullerton, California, a girl began life in a local orphanage with no known record of her birth parents. 2 years later, she found refuge in the loving care of a religious couple. Geraldo, a Brazilian educator from Sao Paulo, taught Portuguese and English at Sunny Hills High School. While teaching in Rio de Janeiro during the early 70s, he met Thelma, and their shared devotion to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints cemented their bond and led to marriage. Biological children eluded them, but they opened their hearts to adoption. Their journey brought them to Fullerton in the late 70s, where they embraced parenthood by welcoming Lori. In 1987, their family grew with the arrival of a son named Paul. Life later took them along separate paths, and the adopted children found solace under Thelma's care in the tranquil town of Orem, Utah. Mother and children pressed on, with Lori and Paul thriving as they walked the halls of their local high school and pursued higher education. Lori blossomed into a compassionate, spirited young woman whose warmth touched everyone she met. At the age of 19, Lori found love with Mark Douglas Hacking, born in April 1976 in North Carolina. Mark hailed from a lineage of medical professionals, the youngest of 3 sons. His father, Douglas, was a pediatrician, and his mother, Helena, a nurse, while his brothers Scotty and Lance carved their own paths in science. After 5 years of nurturing their romance, they married in Salt Lake City, Utah. By then, Lori had risen to a senior assistant manager, and Mark embarked on his medical studies at the University of Utah. Together, they looked forward to parenthood and planned to move to North Carolina, where Mark would undertake his residency and Lori would advance her career. Their story wove a tapestry of family, ambition, and new chapters as they prepared for the next phase. Promise and potential were braided with dreams of a peaceful future until fate intervened on a scorching July day in 2014. Lori, 3 months pregnant, vanished without a trace, leaving a void of uncertainty and despair. Mark's frantic attempts to reach her that morning met only eerie silence, and the days that followed stretched into an ocean of unanswered questions. The mystery of Lori's disappearance cast a heavy shadow over what had seemed a bright future. Hours later, Mark went to the police station to report the inexplicable absence of his 27-year-old wife. He described Lori as having slipped away to a nearby park for her morning exercise, a routine before work, but she never returned. At first, he assumed she had gone straight to her job. His worry deepened when he realized Lori had left her phone behind. He spoke to the officers with a tremor in his voice, yet protocol allowed a formal search for a missing adult only after 24 hours. Driven by fear that Lori might have fallen ill and needed help, he pressed on with his own search. Mark went to the park Lori had planned to visit, hoping for a clue. His hopes dissolved when he discovered her car parked on the edge of the neighborhood, with no trace of Lori nearby. He returned home and launched a relentless outreach, contacting friends, relatives, and colleagues in a bid for information. Their collective response mirrored his distress. No one had seen or heard from Lori that day. News of the disappearance rippled through the community, raising concern beyond their circle. Before law enforcement intervened, hundreds of people, relatives, friends, acquaintances, and concerned citizens rallied to join the search. They combed the surrounding streets, spoke with neighbors, local vendors, and passers-by, and plastered the area with flyers bearing Lori's image, a poignant plea for her safe return. The effort grew with each hour, fueled by the fear that she might be in trouble and in need of help. On the following day, July 20th, the official report of Lori's disappearance reached the media, casting a pall over Salt Lake City. Relatives held a press conference, faces etched with worry, with Mark at the forefront, tears glistening as he appealed to anyone with information to come forward. By nightfall, nearly 1,000 people had joined the unfolding search, their resolve a testament to the community's shared concern. As investigators examined Lori's abandoned car, a perplexing detail emerged. Despite Lori's petite frame, something about the car drew questions, prompting further scrutiny and cautious speculation. The search and the questions continued, a collective effort pressed forward by a town unwilling to give up easily. During a thorough search of the couple's residence, investigators confronted a discrepancy so obvious that it demanded attention. Car keys believed to be found in the park were discovered inside the home, clashing with Lori and Mark's claim that she had left in the car and never returned. Mark said the keys had been left in the ignition when he found the car, so he removed them and brought them home. This explanation did not justify detaining him, but it warranted closer scrutiny by law enforcement. Not long after Lori's disappearance, Mark's behavior grew bizarre as he moved through the city without clothes, crying incoherently and acting in a distraught manner, prompting a psychiatric evaluation. While many saw the episode as stress, investigators suspected a bid to feign illness to dodge accountability. As Mark underwent assessment, investigators secured permission to conduct a thorough search of the residence. They uncovered a troubling scene: traces of a staining substance in the marital bedroom, remnants of soiled bedding, and a new mattress installed on the morning of July 19th, the day Lori vanished. Hidden in the closet lay a sizable bladed implement and bearing dried residue. In the living room, an envelope addressed to Mark contained a letter, supposedly from Lori, accusing him of betraying their trust and announcing their separation. This revelation sharpened law enforcement's suspicions of Mark's direct involvement in Lori's disappearance. The turning point came when Mark's father, Douglas, disclosed that Mark had never graduated from the University of Utah, nor earned a credential in psychology, having been expelled 2 years before after marrying Lori, while continuing to pose as a student with a forged diploma. A month before the tragedy, Mark's confession to his father laid bare the full extent of his deceit. Douglas pressed Mark to resemble his relatives' medical successes and to be the family's sole breadwinner, while Lori remained unaware of the strain developing around them. When the time came for Mark to present credentials, Douglas arranged an interview at a medical school in North Carolina, only to learn that Mark lacked the necessary qualifications. Despite Douglas's urging that he tell Lori the truth, Mark persisted in his deception, claiming admission to the school on the basis of a fictitious psychology degree. Taking matters into his own hands, Douglas informed Lori's sister, who was stunned by the revelation. Lori wrestled with 2 years of lies from her husband while she carried his child. She confided in her closest friend, seeking comfort amid the turmoil. On July 25th, 6 days after Lori disappeared, Mark, confined to a psychiatric facility, was visited by his older brothers and confessed that he had ended Lori's life with one discharge from a firearm. He withheld details at first, leaving investigators to piece together the events in the Hacking household. In a hospital dumpster search, authorities uncovered a spring mattress cut into pieces with stains and dark hair, later confirmed to belong to Lori. Mark hinted to his brothers that he had similarly disassembled Lori's body and disposed of it in a dumpster, but no remains were found, prompting a massive search of the city landfill by police and volunteers. Despite exhaustive efforts, no trace of Lori surfaced, and questions about his involvement intensified as the absence of a body posed challenges. On August 2nd, he faced formal charges for a premeditated act that ended Lori's life, and investigators directed the inquiry toward a transfer to a mental health facility within the jail. A grim breakthrough followed on August 9th, when human remains were unearthed at the landfill and confirmed by experts to be Lori. The investigation revealed that on July 18th, Lori pinned a note to Mark announcing her intent to divorce once she learned of his web of lies. Unable to accept Lori's decision, Mark resorted to violence in the night as she slept, ending her life with one discharge from a firearm. He then sought to disguise the crime by staging her disappearance, and early plans contemplated the harshest possible penalty as legal proceedings moved forward. Mark Hacking's case cast a shadow over a tragic saga of deceit and ruin for Lori Suarez, yet doubts lingered about his awareness at the time of the crime. In April 2005, the penalty was revised to life imprisonment. With mounting evidence and counsel's guidance, he confessed to the homicide, though he could not articulate a motive. Tearfully, he mourned Lori's significance in his life and spoke of a fear of losing her. He claimed to have lost control, seized by a delirium that led him to end his wife's life as she slept while she was pregnant. He linked his mental state to family pressure, relentless demands for academic excellence, and unattainable standards after leaving university, shame for not meeting expectations spiraling into deceit. During the trial, he wore a bulletproof vest and faced ongoing threats to his safety. On June 6, 2005, the defendant was convicted of a first-degree homicide and sentenced to life imprisonment, parole eligible not sooner than 2035. Despite appeals, attempts to overturn the verdict were unsuccessful. Upon the verdict, he accepted the prison as his fate, recognizing that full atonement might be beyond reach. The consequences of his actions left irreparable scars on the lives of all involved. Lori's family decided to remove his surname from her headstone, laying her to rest under her maiden name Suarez. A year into his incarceration, authorities uncovered that Hacking profited from selling personal items, autographs, palm prints, and prison letterheads on an online site for crime memorabilia. After being interviewed, he ceased the activity and expressed remorse. Remarkably, in the years that followed, he maintained correspondence with his former mother-in-law, Thelma Suarez. Guided by her faith, Thelma offered forgiveness and sought solace amid the enduring pain. The Lori Suarez case became the focus of an episode of the television series Escape and sparked discussions on talk shows and documentaries, including the inaugural installment of the crime program Lies Worth Dying For. In 2014, the second season of My Dirty Little Secret dedicated an episode to the tragedy. The true crime podcast Sword and Scale investigates the case in its 29th episode, released on July 18, 2020. At a mission hotel in Manuel Antonio, within the Costa Rican province of Punta Arenas, she traveled with her dog Mafela, a small canine she treated as family. The first day passed with simple pleasures, time on the beach, a meal at a local restaurant, and a few drinks, typical for a vacationer. The following afternoon, at 6:30, she requested a bottle of wine, mineral water, and 2 glasses to be delivered to her room, giving no hint of visitors. There were no movements recorded from her room through the afternoon and evening. By July 20th, hotel staff tried to reach her but received no response. A staff member who had spoken to her earlier recalled that she lived alone after a recent separation, traveling only with Mafela, and that the ongoing pandemic had worsened her mental health and her need for a break. With these factors in mind, staff conducted a routine safety check. They found the main door locked from the inside and then approached the emergency exit to the patio, a door designed for guests with pets. The exit was partially open as they entered, Inside, an unpleasant odor and several visible stains greeted them. Mafela sat alive but clearly frightened in a corner, avoiding contact with the staff. On the bed lay a motionless figure, wrapped in a sheet, the lifeless form of Maria Luisa Asino. Maria Luisa Asino was a respected anesthesiologist, 43 years old, and head of the Department of Anesthesiology and Rehabilitation at Sima Hospital in Gazu. Her colleagues admired her unwavering dedication, especially during the early days of the pandemic. Beyond her professional duties, she arranged health insurance, coordinated medical appointments, and was a trusted support for the Asino family. Her parents lived in Fortuna and San Carlos, a distance that kept her from being with them as often as she wished. Friends described her as strong, intelligent, and friendly, with a zest for travel within Costa Rica and abroad. Her impeccable reputation was widely known, and the news of the tragedy shocked the country and her relatives. The mystery surrounding the case began to unfold after the discovery, leaving many questions and a sense of loss for those who knew her. The scene surrounding Maria Luisa was disturbing not only because of the violence she endured, but also because of the complexities that emerged when her Costa Rican hotel room was examined. Access records followed a familiar pattern. Magnetic key usage in guest rooms is logged with an associated code, allowing staff to distinguish guests from employees. In Maria Luisa's case, there were no unauthorized entries. Every documented access from the previous night onward belonged to her, yet a potential entry remained. A sliding glass door at the rear could be locked only from inside and did not rely on the key system, leaving room for doubt about undetected access if she had opened it or left it unlocked. This possibility meant someone could have gained entry through that door or exploited an unlocked moment. When the body was found, staff immediately called the police. Authorities quickly concluded that a fatal act had occurred. The remains showed extensive damage and signs of intense torment by a highly enraged assailant. Forensic teams gathered evidence, established the cause, and scrutinized details to identify a suspect. Given the severity of the injuries, officials recommended a closed casket funeral. Autopsy findings included fragments scattered about and 2 broken fingernails signaling a struggle. They also noted that the perpetrator had washed the remains. According to the criminalist report, the incident involved a large pool of stains at the scene. Afterward, the killer moved the remains to the bathroom, cleaned, dried, wrapped them in a sheet, and returned them to the bed. Despite efforts to erase evidence, traces persisted across floors, walls, curtains, and linens, underscoring the brutality of the act. Experts photographed and collected every piece of physical evidence before the autopsy proceeded. Police questioned hotel staff and guests to gather further details. Given the ferocious nature of the attack, it is believed she cried out and her dog barked, yet no one recalled hearing anything that night. The hotel had low occupancy due to the pandemic lockdowns, but a small number of people remained, including owner Harry Bowden and his husband Dano, along with a few residents who stayed thanks to Bowden's generosity. In Maria Luisa's room sat a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. A quick check of her phone showed she had shared a photo of the glasses with a friend, and a voice message gave no hint of companionship or plans for company. Maria Luisa spoke warmly about the hotel, noting how well she and her dog Mafela were treated. She recalled dancing with several people, including the bartender, another guest, and the owner's assistant. Despite noting the hotel's somewhat worn condition and limited staff, she remained fond of it. Friends and relatives observed that she often ordered 2 glasses when alone, one for liquor and one for water, suggesting she was not awaiting company. This observation led to the theory that an intruder, familiar with the place, had noticed an open back door before the attack. Yet the intensity of the violence pointed to a personal grievance, making it likely the crime was the work of someone who knew her and bore strong anger. There was no indication she had been accompanied or dating anyone. A further review of the autopsy revealed signs of prior mistreatment, including marks around the throat and bruises on the cheeks, lips, arms, and chest. Authorities reviewed the autopsy results along with interviews from family, friends, and hotel staff. They concluded that a single person could not have carried out this act alone, especially since no one recalled hearing a cry. They speculated that at least 2 attackers were involved, with a possible third participant given signs of prior mistreatment. In this scenario, 2 attackers restrained her while a third took part. There were no indications of ropes or bindings on her body. Officers also suspected that something might have been placed in her mouth to prevent noise during the act. The conclusion pointed to a fatal head injury, possibly from a heavy blow, an object strike, or a hard fall. Overall, the act was senseless and lacked any clear motive. The first suspect emerged quickly due to his many fresh wounds resembling scratches and bruises, suggesting a struggle. This suspect was Terrera Martinez, a dancer at city nightclubs who had been staying at the hotel during the events. He was detained as investigators pursued links to the case. Footprints matched those found at the scene, especially in front of the bed on a black porcelain floor. Shortly after Terrera Herrera's arrest, a second suspect, Luis Carlos Miranda, was detained on a motel guard's report of seeing him in the hallways at night beside the first suspect. Following Terrera's arrest, Luis Carlos was questioned about any potential link to the crime. Dental records revealed that his teeth matched bite marks observed on Maria Luisa. Hotel staff testified that Maria Luisa had casual exchanges with both Luis Carlos and Terrera. They were not friends, merely greetings, perhaps repeated because there were only a few guests in residence. This may have occurred because the hotel hosted only a handful of guests at the time, making their paths cross more than once. The hotel owner had accommodated 2 friends due to financial hardship and the ongoing pandemic, Luis Carlos and Terrera Herrera. With the matching footprints and bite marks, investigators questioned Harry Bowden, the hotel owner. Bowden said that on the night of July 19, 2020, he and his husband shared a supper with Luis Carlos and Terrera Herrera in their apartment inside the hotel. After dinner, all 4 proceeded to a private pool area. Bowden explained that Luis Carlos ran the hotel's website and related tasks, while Herrera served as cook and bartender in exchange for lodging. What began as a distant relationship grew into a friendship through frequent meals and shared time, since they had moved into the hotel about a year earlier. In August 2020, authorities arrested Bowden. Dental evidence confirmed 2 bite marks matched Bowden's teeth. When police seized the detainees' phones, they found incriminating text messages between Luis Carlos and Harry Bowden, including an invitation from Luis Carlos for Bowden to observe another woman during intimate activities, a dialogue that had occurred days before the incident. Both suspects described the messages as jokes with no real intent. Along with the physical evidence, this information supported detaining them. Bowden's husband was not detained, as no proof connected him to the crime. The last detail noted that Luis Carlos invited the hotel owner to participate in intimate arrangements with a woman while he was supposed to be observing, and the correspondence occurred several days before. Thus, the investigation assembled a complex picture of tension among the 4 men, shaped by shared lodging and concealed motives. The suspects claimed the messages were mere jokes, but when combined with physical evidence, they justified keeping them in custody while the case developed. The only person not detained was Harry Bowden's husband, due to a lack of texts or fingerprints, and because the bite marks did not align with those on the victim. The defense argued that the bite marks were inconclusive and did not definitively tie any of them to the homicide. Before the trial began, the 3 men faced charges for the homicide of Maria Luisa Sinjo. Bowden's attorney sought release under house arrest, citing the pandemic and his 69 years, along with mobility issues after knee surgery and a long period relying on a cane, even appearing in a wheelchair at the start of proceedings. He was placed under house arrest and could stay at his hotel with access to staff, dining, and a pool. On the 13th of September 2022, the public hearing opened with the prosecution presenting evidence, yet there were challenges proving Bowden's and Miranda's involvement. Despite text exchanges and bite marks, the links remained inconclusive, and the bite marks could only exclude some suspects. Hotel staff were cleared, while Bowden and Miranda remained under scrutiny, lacking conclusive dental evidence to prove their direct role in the incident. By contrast, Theodore Herrera faced substantial evidence, a trace material and injuries on his body sustained during Maria Louise's self-defense, with the victim's trace found under his fingernails and on his shoes, watch, and cell phone recovered in his room during the search, leading to a 50-year sentence. Bowden and Miranda were acquitted for lack of direct physical linkage to the homicide. Many continued to suspect their involvement, as hotel cameras reportedly stopped functioning on that day, hinting at manipulation. Another person, a hotel security guard, came under scrutiny but was not arrested due to insufficient evidence, and this guard later moved to another post. Several elements of the case at the hotel hint at wider connections beyond the principal suspect. 2 guests reported a major outage that night, a disruption that could have disabled cameras and other access systems. Investigators waited 9 days before surveying the hotel owner's private office, a delay that could have allowed removal of incriminating items. The suspect's social media activity was reviewed, revealing discussions of a fantasy tied to the way Maria Lewis's belongings were found. Legally, Harry Bowden and Luis Carlos Miranda are not implicated. The sole person held is Herrera, who now faces a new trial that could lessen his sentence. Although the case is considered closed, the Asino family believes some concealment or defensive maneuver remains at play. They say Maria Louise's items were returned with stains that perplexed them, since they had hoped to preserve the evidence for possible new findings. Even with Herrera's conviction, the family remains uneasy about the acquittals of Bowden and Miranda. The matter stands as resolved on paper, yet questions endure about what was hidden or overlooked in the defense.